What to do? I'm going to do some commentary on this low layer Damascus video. As you guys know, I never really cared for Damascus that much early in my knife aficionado stage. I just thought it was sort of gaudy and it looked sort of cheap to me. You know, it looked like any other knife that I would see mostly from Pakistan, for example. So I didn't really have an appreciation. And then Aaron Wilburn came along and we had one of his knives at the store, a feather Damascus knife. I think I've told this story. And I just looking at that knife day after day, I really started to appreciate Damascus. That said, I never really cared for low layer Damascus because it just sort of took me back to those Pakistani knives and sort of cheaply made, you know, it seemed like lazy Damascus. If you're going to go to all this trouble to make this Damascus and add this varied element, one of many that you can put in a knife, but this extra artistic layer of making this pattern welded steel, and then you're going to do it sort of lazily where you just put a few layers, then I was just sort of like, low layer Damascus. But more recently, you know, there's been a lot of interest in low layer Damascus. I think it's sort of coming back and it's being manipulated. So in other words, it's not just fewer folds in the steel and less layers, but they're taking those layers and manipulating them and doing some interesting things with them. And so I was sort of looking at, you know, how could I do something simple that was still, I don't know, interesting to look at. So this is sort of what I came up with. And the goal here was to get some, you know, as far as this first knife, this Hunter, was to get sort of this ebb and flow of a pattern that went across the knife and really contrasted well with it, with this black. I just wanted this black blade. And so I think this ultimately turns out pretty good. I have to say it turned out a little better than I thought. You can see on the press there that I was pausing the press, and that was to cool off the ridges so that they would be harder and push further into the soft steel, the hot steel beneath them, and they would accentuate that, the divots, which I misspelled. I misspelled divot in this video. Okay, it's D-I-V-O-T. It's like no matter how hard I try, I misspell everything. There's something every video that I misspell. I mean, I need to type all this out and spell check it before I put it in the video, I guess. I don't know. So far, so good. The effect is not quite as substantial as I want yet. So even though I divide up the billet, when I make the Hunter knife, the first knife, this one, I'm going to go ahead and repeat that again. I'm going to repeat that process again. I'm going to add more solidly etching black steel and put those divots back in it and press it down again just to sort of accentuate that wavy effect. We'll see if we can make it even, you know, bring it out even more and make the pattern look even more manipulated. And when I grind down, I grind into the original billet layer. So I'm actually trying to disrupt the silver line and actually sort of transect it. You can see there. I've been having some problems with my press. It's like a single piston or column, I guess not a piston, a single column press. There's one bar that sits right in the middle of the die, above the middle of the die, and pushes the die down. And it's sort of off kilter now, so I make everything a little bit rhomboid. And I've looked at it, when you press hard enough, it sort of straightens out, but not before it sort of turns the steel a little bit rhomboid. So I don't know. I guess I need kissing blocks on both sides of the dies now or something if I want to make things truly square. At any rate, here we go, pressing out the tang. I'm getting a little better at this. It's still a little bit nerve-wracking. You know, one miss with the die, one extra, you know, if you press extra hard, you basically sort of squash everything to the point that you have to start over. I built this little sort of half fuller to go on the bottom there. I'm sort of manipulating it with the billet itself there. And this is sort of how I've decided I'm going to be able to draw things out side to side with my press. And you know what, god darn it? It works. One of the few things I've fabricated that works in my garage. All right, time to grind this thing to shape. I've got lots of extra steel, and I've just really come to appreciate extra steel in these types of projects, especially before heat treat and going into heat treat and grinding the shape and getting lines squared up. And an integral, keeping everything down a middle line is a lot more difficult because you can't lay it on a flat surface. And so just having that extra steel to make adjustments as you go, you can grind away from side to side, seems to be a big deal for me right now, is just keeping some extra material around, especially as I move into integrals and try to figure them out. So you guys have probably figured out by now that the 1 hour of hand sanding video came from the making of these two knives. I thought about making it like a 10-hour video where you just put one pass, back and forth and loop it. So it's just the same back and forth, just stretching that out for like 10 hours. Oh man, that'd be so epic. Someone's got to do that. Might be me. A sneak peek shows this thing looks pretty cool. It's going to do exactly what I hoped it would do. So that is really sweet. I drew down the sort of the back and the tang with the torch because this is W2 and it's actually pretty hard. I left it in the 63 range. And so then I got to thinking, well, I better draw some of this down if I'm going to leave it that hard. So it's easy to do with these knives, and I just did it, and I think it's cool. I think it's going to add functionally to the knife, make me feel better about sending it out the door without it being too fragile type of thing. So, all right, knife number 2, I just basically stacked the two pieces of the original billet up, turned over one next to each other, and then we're going to re-square it on the corners, which brings the pattern from the top and the pattern from the side and puts them both on the side, basically. So it's a low layer Damascus, but there's two different patterns that should be visible. Sort of a very ordinary lines, pattern, and then more of a topographical pattern. At any rate, you'll see here when we etch this up what I'm talking about. See how it drew, the top half is from the top of the billet and the bottom half of the side is from the side of the billet. And I think it's pretty cool, man. I think that works. So we'll stack them up again, get them forge welded. So here we go with this one-sided fuller. Works pretty good. I have to admit, it works pretty good. Not nearly as awkward or crazy as I thought it would be. You can't put in true fullers. That's more of sort of a spreading die. You can't put in true fullers unless you press both sides at the same time. But as a spreading die, I'm going to keep it. This one I don't mind hammering to shape. I think that's fine. We'll move the pattern around, but that's no big deal. It's going to be a paring knife for my brother, and it's going to be a long one. Someone in the comments mentioned it's quite a long paring knife. And I agree, it's probably a little more than a paring knife, but it's got the geometry of a paring knife. And, I've seen paring knives that long. I'm not an expert in cooking knives, but he seems to like it. He thinks it works great, and so. This is my least favorite thing about forging knives right now. When you're either trying to forge to shape and you're going to keep the spine where it is and you're not going to do a lot of grinding, or you have limited material such that you're not going to do a lot of grinding. In either case, it's such a fight for me right now to keep the spine straight and the overall profile without a reverse banana and draw out the heel of the knife. As soon as I start drawing out the heel, it just pushes everything sort of up and everything starts bending back. And then I have to hammer back on the blade portion that I just had I drew out a nice heel, and now I'm having to hammer it to push the spine of the knife back straight. And it's just something I'm struggling with right now. I don't think I've ever struggled with it like this. But then again, I'm used to doing a little more grinding on the blades that I forge too. So maybe that's part of the issue, I guess, is that I'm trying to do less grinding. See, I drew that heel out so nice. Look at it. And now I'm going to have to hammer on it to straighten the spine right behind it. That's infuriating. There's a That Works video where Ilya talks about if you hold the knife on edge at a certain angle while you're hammering and sort of pull down with the hammer, that it doesn't push the spine back. And I think that's complete bullshit. Normalization works great, and the other major benefit for grinding thick and leaving material is that things don't tend to warp. Even though ultimately this is going to be a very thin knife, it comes out straight from the quench, and that's a big deal. Wrestling with the crooked knife is just a nightmare sometimes, especially if your knife is thin and you don't have material to take off. So I'd rather just, forge and heat treat a little thick, put on a 36 grit belt after the heat treat, and then just grind. That's fine. Now this is going to be the first time I've really experimented with Nescafe instant coffee. It's very inexpensive. You can buy bottles of it on Amazon. You can mix it to different strengths very easily. People save this coffee. I just sort of poured it out after I was done with it because it just wasn't that much coffee, I guess. You have to get a nice ferric chloride etch to deepen your layers, to get some elevation differences between your layers, because even though the Nescafe doesn't darken the 15 and 20 or raised silver portion as much as ferric chloride, not nearly as much, you still have to polish it. And so if you're dragging sandpaper or polishing or whatever, those 15 and 20 layers, you can still take off the oxides generated by the coffee on the black layers. Those oxides aren't any more durable from coffee than they are from ferric chloride. They come off fairly easily. So you still need that height elevation difference. And you know what? It made it blacker than ferric chloride, and I like it. It's probably something I'll still play around with a little more. I don't think it's a panacea I thought it would be, or some people make it out to be, but it's still pretty cool. So these turned out great. I'm really pretty happy with them overall. What do you guys think about this low layer Damascus and the idea of doing some manipulation with it? Nice and bold. Pretty cool. I like it. You guys sound off. Let me know what you think. Talk to you later.